In the stillness of a late evening, CEO Michael Reynolds sat alone in his expansive office, filtering through the day's routine employee communications. Most requests were mundane: shift swaps, vacation days, payroll clarifications. But one message stood out in its quiet simplicity. It wasn't a complaint, nor a demand. It read, "Would it be possible to take home any leftover meals after my shift?" The sender was Sophia Carter, a line cook who had worked at the company for just over a year. She had never caused problems, never called in sick, always showed up early and left late. Michael frowned, puzzled. It was unusual for an employee to make such a humble request in writing. Most would simply ask a manager or take leftovers informally, yet Sophia had chosen the official route. That alone spoke volumes. What made her feel the need to submit it this way? Why did it feel so formal, so quietly desperate? Michael wasn't known for indulging emotional responses. As a CEO, his responsibilities centered on numbers, operations, and corporate success. But this note tugged at him in a way he couldn't ignore. Out of curiosity, he pulled up Sophia's profile. 24 years old, no listed emergency contacts, no spouse. Odd. Maybe she was frugal, maybe she just didn't like wasting food. But something in the tone of her request didn't suggest choice, it suggested necessity. For the first time in years, Michael felt something shift inside him. He found himself staring at the clock. 10:47 p.m. Her shift ended at 11. Without fully knowing why, he grabbed his coat, shut down his laptop, and walked out the back exit. Something about Sophia's quiet plea demanded more than approval. It called for understanding. And before the night was over, it would demand far more than that. Michael didn't fully understand why he was standing in the cold, dark parking lot behind the restaurant. CEOs didn't follow employees home. They didn't wait in the shadows. But something about Sophia Carter's quiet, formal request to take leftover food had pierced through his polished corporate detachment. He spotted her through the kitchen's back door, wiping down counters, hair damp from the heat of the grills, moving with practiced efficiency. A manager handed her a brown paper bag. She nodded, tucked it under her arm, and removed her apron, folding it neatly before grabbing a frayed backpack. Without fanfare, she stepped into the night, heading toward the bus stop down the street. Michael stood there, unmoving for a moment, frozen not from the cold, but from the realization that he had never considered how any of his employees got home. He climbed into his luxury sedan but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he watched as she waited under a flickering streetlight, shifting from foot to foot. The bus was late. When it finally arrived, she boarded quickly. So did Michael, carefully trailing her at a distance. He expected her to get off within 15 or 20 minutes, but the ride stretched on. As the city lights faded, so did the neighborhoods he recognized. The buildings became more run down, the sidewalks cracked, the glow of the skyline swallowed by darkened industrial zones. Finally, after nearly an hour, Sophia rang the bell and stepped off. Michael followed, parking discreetly down the street. She walked with determination, never glancing around. Then she turned a corner and disappeared behind a row of rusted cars. Michael crept forward in his car and then saw it. A trailer. Small, worn, and dimly lit from within. Sophia unlocked the door and stepped inside, her silhouette framed in the glow. Michael stared, stunned. This wasn't a cheap apartment. It was a last resort. He had come to satisfy a curiosity, but what he found wasn't curiosity. It was crisis, and he wasn't prepared for what came next. As Michael sat silently in his car, his eyes fixed on the modest trailer Sophia had just entered, a tightness grew in his chest. It wasn't just the size of the home that startled him, it was what it represented. This wasn't temporary housing or a minimalist lifestyle. It was survival. The trailer looked weather-beaten and fragile, barely holding together under the weight of time and hardship. Through the thin curtains, a single, flickering light revealed the worn-down interior. Then, to Michael's surprise, movement. 3 small figures ran from the shadows. Children. They rushed to Sophia the moment she set the paper bag on the counter, wrapping their arms around her waist in pure, uninhibited joy. Despite the exhaustion written across her face, she smiled, hugging them back with gentle strength. Michael blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. These weren't her children, they were too young. Siblings, perhaps? Then a frail older woman appeared, her steps slow and unsteady. Her back was curved, her hair streaked with gray. Sophia moved quickly to help her into a chair, whispering something kind as she touched her shoulder. Michael watched the scene unfold with growing unease. The interior of the trailer told a story of long-term struggle. No pictures, no decor, just the bare essentials of living. When Sophia began unpacking the food and carefully dividing it onto 4 small plates, Michael noticed something jarring. She didn't prepare one for herself. The children ate quickly, hungrily, while the grandmother ate slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Sophia sat at the table, smiling and nodding, pushing food around her plate but never taking a bite. She was pretending, for them, sacrificing her own dinner so the people she cared for could eat. Michael's throat tightened. The contrast between this and his own lavish dinner earlier that evening was too sharp to ignore. He had come here expecting answers. Instead, he found a kind of silent heroism, buried beneath fatigue and humility. Sophia wasn't just struggling, she was sacrificing day after day without complaint. And for Michael, this changed everything. He couldn't unsee it. He couldn't pretend it was okay. The truth hit him hard. This was not just a personal hardship. It was a systemic failure. Michael remained still, his hands clenched around the steering wheel as he continued to observe the dimly lit trailer. Inside, Sophia moved with practiced grace, her exhaustion masked beneath a gentle smile. She sat among the children and the elderly woman, laughing softly when the kids joked, nodding attentively as they spoke, but something deeper played behind her eyes. A weariness that couldn't be hidden. Then one of the children, a boy no older than 10, looked up at her with concern and asked a simple question. "Did you eat at work today?" Michael leaned forward instinctively, sensing the importance of the moment. Sophia's face faltered. Just for a second. It was a flicker, a hesitation so brief most would miss it. But Michael saw it. He saw the way her smile dimmed before she quickly nodded and lied. "Yeah, I had something earlier." The boy didn't challenge her. He just nodded back, quietly, as if he already knew the truth. Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. She wasn't just skipping dinner tonight. This was routine, a practiced deception, rooted not in shame but in love. Night after night she had likely sat there, pretending, making sure the children felt safe, fed and secure, even if it meant going hungry herself. The strength it took to carry that kind of burden, to smile through hunger, to give everything without asking for anything, was staggering. It was the kind of sacrifice that went unnoticed because it was never spoken aloud, and yet, it was more powerful than any speech. Michael's own life flashed through his mind, gala dinners, catered meetings, luxury retreats, and he suddenly felt ashamed. He had walked through life with comfort while someone like Sophia, working in his own company, was starving in silence, not because she was lazy, not because she made poor choices, but because she loved her family more than herself. Michael's view of her shifted entirely in that moment. She wasn't just an employee, she was a protector, a provider, a quiet warrior, and for the first time in a long time, he realized how blind he had been to the battles fought in silence all around him. As Michael sat there in the dark, the quiet hum of the street fading into the background, a heavy realization settled over him like a storm cloud. He had spent years believing he was a good leader, a fair CEO who approved budgets, signed off on payroll, and nodded at presentations about employee satisfaction. He had attended charity galas and spoken at conferences about corporate responsibility. But tonight, parked outside a run-down trailer, watching one of his most dedicated employees sacrifice her own well-being for her family, he felt exposed, stripped bare. The story he had told himself about being a compassionate leader was unraveling. How could someone like Sophia, full-time, dependable, hard-working, be living like this? Why hadn't he noticed? Why hadn't anyone? His company prided itself on being family-oriented, yet one of its own was coming home to a paper-thin mattress on the floor, skipping meals to feed children and an elderly woman who likely depended on her. This wasn't just Sophia's hardship. It was a failure embedded deep within the culture he'd helped build. one that measured success in profits, not people. He thought about all the food his restaurants threw out each night, the bonuses awarded to executives for hitting quarterly targets, the corporate retreats in five-star resorts. Then he pictured Sophia, carefully dividing leftover food into 4 portions, pretending to eat so others could. It shook him. Not just emotionally, but ethically. For the first time in a long time, he saw the divide between intention and impact. He hadn't meant for anyone to suffer, but he had also never looked closely enough to prevent it. And now that he had seen, he couldn't unsee. He couldn't go back to boardrooms and spreadsheets pretending everything was fine, because it wasn't. Sophia had unknowingly opened his eyes, not with complaints or protests, but through quiet resilience. And Michael knew that if he left things as they were, he wouldn't just be complicit, he'd be a coward. Something had to change. Starting now. Michael didn't sleep that night. He remained in his car, eyes fixed on the darkened trailer, his mind racing with questions, guilt, and a growing sense of urgency. The longer he sat, the more unbearable the weight became. How many other employees were like Sophia, suffering quietly while keeping the wheels of his company turning? How many sacrifices had gone unseen because no one at the top ever bothered to look? He had always trusted reports, relied on data, assumed the systems in place were enough. But the truth was now uncomfortably clear. The systems were broken, and he was responsible. Not out of malice, but out of detachment, and that, he now realized, was just as dangerous. At 12:47 a.m., Michael grabbed his phone and called his head of operations. He didn't ask for input, he gave a directive. We need to fix this, all of it, starting in the morning. He didn't wait for a reply. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a reckoning. By noon the next day, his office was a flurry of activity. Michael arrived early, not in a tailored suit but in a sweater and jeans, his expression focused. Policies were overhauled. Leftover meals would no longer be discarded, they would be packaged and distributed daily to employees who needed them. Wages were reassessed and increased to reflect the true cost of living. A new emergency assistance program was created to provide support for workers facing unexpected hardship. Every layer of bureaucracy that had once made it difficult for employees to speak up was peeled away. As the hours passed, Michael didn't delegate from afar, he was in the room, reviewing every policy with sharp, personal scrutiny. He had seen the problem with his own eyes, and he refused to let it fade into abstraction. This wasn't about charity, it was about justice. And it wasn't just for Sophia, it was for everyone who had ever smiled through struggle just to survive another day. For the first time in years, the company wasn't just changing on paper, it was becoming human again. And Michael, he wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was finally becoming the leader he should have been all along. Sophia walked into work the next morning like she always did, quietly, head down, ready to take on another long shift. She had no idea that everything had changed overnight. Her routine was the same: clock in, tie her apron, check the prep station. But before she could begin, her manager called her aside, handing her a plain envelope with her name neatly written on the front. Confused, she opened it and froze. Inside was a letter confirming a substantial raise, not just a small bump in pay, but a life-changing increase, enough to move her family out of the trailer, enough to afford regular meals without guilt, enough to breathe. Sophia blinked, her hands trembling as she reread the letter. Her manager smiled softly and said, "You deserve this." But Sophia couldn't find the words. For months she had carried the weight of others on her back, her siblings, her grandmother, making sacrifices no one ever saw. And now, for the first time, someone had noticed. Someone had done more than just see her, they had acted. As she returned to the kitchen, a strange feeling washed over her. Not relief exactly, but something close. Hope. She wouldn't have to pretend anymore, wouldn't have to lie about eating, wouldn't have to stretch one meal for 4. That night, she'd go home and tell her family the news. She could already picture their faces. For the first time in a long time, Sophia allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Not the tired kind, not the polite kind, but one born of quiet victory. She had fought silently for so long, and now, silently, something had finally fought for her. Michael arrived at the office that morning a CEO, but by the end of the day he was something more. He had witnessed a reality that shattered his assumptions, a quiet struggle that exposed a loud truth. People can be drowning right beside you, and you might never know unless you choose to look. Sophia's story was not unique, and that was the most painful part. All around him, in every department, on every shift, there were likely more employees just like her, exhausted, hungry, sacrificing in silence. And that silence didn't mean everything was fine, it meant they had learned not to ask. Michael realized that leadership wasn't about status, reports, or titles. It was about responsibility, not just to profits, but to people. Sophia never asked for pity. She never made noise. She showed up every day and gave everything she had, but her strength revealed something bigger, a broken system that relied too heavily on quiet sacrifice. Michael understood, at last, that compassion wasn't weakness, it was clarity, and action was its true test. This story reminds us that true leadership isn't measured by titles or wealth, but by the willingness to see and respond to the quiet struggles of others. In a world where appearances often mask reality, it's easy to overlook the silent burdens people carry, especially those who never complain. Sophia's quiet perseverance and sacrifice reveal a deeper truth. Many suffer in silence, not because they lack strength, but because they prioritize others over themselves. For older generations who have seen both hardship and resilience, this story is a powerful call to stay compassionate, observant, and engaged. It encourages us to ask the deeper questions, to look beyond surface-level interactions, and to never assume someone is fine just because they smile. Whether in our families, communities, or workplaces, we each hold the power to make meaningful change, sometimes with nothing more than empathy and decisive action. As we age, our legacy is shaped less by what we achieve for ourselves and more by how we lift others along the way. Let this story be a reminder: if we have the ability to help, to notice, to care, then we must. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient, but today.